So tonight, we're going to start a brand new series, and this series is called This Changes Everything. Okay? Now, we are going to do this differently, okay? We are literally going to treat this sermon series like it's like a TV Netflix show. That's why I did that whole thing with you. We're gonna get invested in some of these characters, okay? We're gonna get inside their mind. I'm gonna try my best to make it look like we're actually in. We're gonna have flashbacks in time. It's gonna be so well. But let me tell you why we're doing this series. See, when God started putting this series in my heart about a year ago, I thought I was preparing it for a way different period in time. But the truth is, God knew what time we would be in. God knew that the church would be in like this time where we don't really know what's going on. God knew that we would have a very, very, very divided nation. Okay? And so we're gonna hit on some of that stuff. Okay, we're gonna talk about all that. And so what the problem is with this divided nation, I think, is so many of us are trying to pick sides. Okay? So many of us are trying to pick sides, and we've gotten so focused on picking sides that we've forgotten to pick Jesus. Okay? We've been so focused on picking sides that we have forgotten to pick Jesus. And I'm glad that Jesus didn't forget to pick me. Okay? Because I think this message of Jesus, sadly, is one of the most non-talked about messages in church. It's crazy because it's the most life-changing message that anybody could ever hear. But so many preachers, so many churches are trying to articulate sermons, are trying to articulate teaching, and they've shied away from the most life-changing truth of Jesus Christ. Okay? And the problem is, we've been raising a generation that doesn't even know Jesus because we won't teach it. And so that's what we're going to do. We are going to teach this message from Jesus, because I believe that y'all are world changers, okay? I believe y'all can change the world. I believe there is greatness inside of you, but you will never experience it if you don't know Jesus. And I know some of this stuff we're going to talk about, you've heard it a million times. I challenge you, look at it from a fresh eye. Look at it from a fresh perspective, okay? I'm going to try to make it to where it's not like, oh, just routine. It's going to be pretty cool, but just look at it from a fresh perspective. In week 1, are you ready for the message title for week 1? Very relevant for today's world. The message title is Restore the Unity. Look, they done messed up. They done let a preacher preach twice on a Sunday. Never done it before. But we're just going to see how this goes. Who was at service this morning? A lot of fun, wasn't it? A lot of fun. I was excited about what God did in the service this morning. But one of the cool things about this TV series that we're starting right now is that you're a main character. Okay? You're an intricate part of the whole story. Okay? And so we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna have flashbacks in time. We're gonna do all this stuff. But our first scene starts at a table, much like this. It's a Thursday night. Okay? And this guy, this very important person, is gathered around some of his friends. And he's having to tell them something harsh. All his friends are gathered around, and he says, hey, this is going to be hard to hear, but I'm leaving, and you can't come with me. I need you to see why this is important, because Jesus had done these people that were around Jesus had given up their entire lives, left everything they knew, left family, left their jobs, just to follow Jesus. I need you to put yourself in this position. Imagine you have nothing to go back to, and the guy that you've been following the past 3 years says, hey, I'm leaving, and you can't come with me. They had seen this guy do miracles, raise the dead, do all this crazy stuff. And he says, you can't come with me. They had this peace and security around Jesus because he had comforted them. He had taught them. He had been their hope. They had seen him do all these things. And now he's saying, you can't come with me. How would you feel in this situation? How would you feel if the person you love the most, the person you care about the most, walked up to you today and said, I'm leaving and you can't come? How would you feel? I would feel abandoned, right? I would feel hurt. I would be scared. I would be everything in between. And that's exactly what these guys were feeling at this table. And the first guy to speak up at the table is a guy named Peter. Peter, in this scene, he looks at Jesus, questioning what's going on and saying, "Where are you going?" Now let me tell you about Peter. Peter was this guy who, man, he had so much greatness in him. He didn't really get it right that much. Peter was this guy that he just had to be the first one to speak up. He felt like it was his responsibility to speak up. That was Peter, okay? Peter was one of the best fishermen in the world. I mean, this dude would be like, Dylan, this dude would put you to shame, okay? This dude was like the best fisher. Like, he made money fishing. That was this guy. And he left it all, said, nope, not anymore, just to follow Jesus. So you can imagine the frustration, the hurt, the disappointment, the questioning when he said, "Where are you going?" But then this next guy speaks up. And this guy doubted a lot. His name's Thomas. He's one of those people, he had to see it to believe it. Have you ever seen one of those type of people? They got to see it to believe it. That's this guy. He had a lot of questions. He had to see it to believe it. And this guy speaks up and he says, "You won't tell us where you're going, so how can we have direction? How can we know the way, Jesus?" And he's going through all these questions, and you can imagine his heart as he's already doubted so much. And how Jesus is saying, "I'm leaving," how this plays into his mind. Saying, "Jesus, you're abandoning me. You're leaving me. What is it?" And then this next guy speaks up. His name is Philip. Now, Philip, he speaks up and he says, "Jesus, just show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us." Now, let me tell you about Philip. He was that guy that he didn't really understand what was happening in all this, okay? He knew who Jesus was and believed it, but he didn't fully grasp what all it meant, and he had a bunch of questions. He was that guy that was so hungry for more, but just had questions. And then this next guy spoke up, and there's all sorts of different names. I've been trying to figure out his real name a lot this week. His name is James. And he asked Jesus a very interesting question. He says, "Why is it that you're going to show yourself to us, but not the world?" Now, we don't know a lot about this guy, but from that question, we can see a lot about all these guys. We can see that they had a comfort level with Jesus. They had a comfort level, and he provided peace and security. Okay? They felt like they could come to Jesus with anything. All right? And they're gathered around at this table just moments before Jesus is going to leave. Now, put yourself in this situation. Okay? Put yourself in this situation. You're one of these men giving up everything. This is your last moments with Jesus. Everything you had given your life for had come to this moment. And now Jesus was telling you that he was going to leave. And it gets worse. It gets worse. Jesus says, "Hey, I know that I'm leaving, and you're not going to understand that. But guess what? It's a good thing." I'm sorry, if I'm one of these guys and Jesus says that, I'm ready to hit somebody. Right? I'm feeling abandoned and hurt, and you're going to be like, "Hey, it's a good thing." How could Jesus be so selfish to tell me that it's a good thing when I had given up everything? I know, Jesus, you didn't give up anything. I gave up everything. How can you be so selfish to say that it's a good thing? But then when he tells his friends, the disciples, what happens next, when he tells them the next thing, reality begins to set in. He says this, he said, "Hey, it's a good thing that I'm going away because I'm going to send a good buddy of mine to you named the Holy Spirit. This guy knows much more than I do. He's going to live inside of you, and who I am will be a part of you. So you're going to grieve now, and you're not going to understand this now, but you're going to have so much joy that no one will be able to take that joy from you." Okay? When he tells them this, reality begins to set into these men's hearts. See, they had heard all the stories. They had heard everybody say that Jesus was going to be killed. Jesus' life was going to be taken. He wasn't. Because he claimed to be the Messiah, they were going to put him on a cross. And I'm sure many of them probably just assumed, because they had seen Jesus do so many miracles and so many great things. I'm sure many of them probably assumed this wasn't going to happen, that he would just overcome this death. But what Jesus was saying was starting to make sense. Jesus was basically telling them, I'm going to die. They were starting to get that death was actually a part of the plan. And maybe they were starting to accept the reality that this was a good thing. But imagine how that felt. Have you ever been in a situation where you know what needs to be done, you just wish it could be done a different way? Those of you that are truly following God, and maybe you've been dating somebody, and God's like, hey, you kind of don't need to date that person. You know the breakup needs to happen. You just wish it didn't have to happen, right? That kind of situation. They know what has to be done. They just wish it could be done a different way. And they were probably asking so many questions. Is there any other way? Why do you have to be taken from us? Why can't things stay the same way they've always been? Little did they know that these same questions they were asking had been on this guy's heart for many, many years. You guys ready for our first flashback? We're flashing back to the beginning of time. Okay? Beginning of time. So, the Bible says that God created a man named what? Adam. God created a man named Adam. And the very breath of God was in this man. Everything was the way it was supposed to be. The first guy, Adam, and the first woman, Eve, had this beautiful connection with God, and the relationship between God and people, and God and people was absolutely perfect. So this is how it went down. God created Adam, and things were going great, okay? And then God looked at all the other animals and said, hey, they all have dates. Adam needs a date. And I wish God would say the same thing about me. I wish God would say the same thing about me. I was kidding. He looked and saw all the animals had dates, and Adam didn't, so he's like, I'm going to give this man a woman. Man, you need a woman in your life, right? Dang, okay. Good answer, okay. It's scary over there. Notice how we're all sitting together. Right, so he said he needs a woman. Now, God says something very unique in Scripture that often gets overlooked. He says, it is not good for man to be alone. Okay? Now, when he said this, he was actually talking about Eve. He was actually talking about a woman, and God ended up giving Adam this woman named Eve. But when he says this, when he says it is not good for man to be alone, it actually reveals something very unique about God. It reveals that in God's heart, this whole thing, this whole Christian walk, this whole faith, our whole existence comes down to one thing. You know what that one thing is? Unity. Unity. And in specific, unity with God and unity with each other. Okay? And Satan knew that this unity with Jesus was the most deadly thing in the world to him. Because if you have unity with Jesus and unity with people, you tap into the most unstoppable force in the world. You have power beyond anything that you can understand. The greatness that's inside of you becomes expressed. And this terrifies Satan because it is the most dangerous thing in the world to him. So Satan said, I gotta break this unity. I can't have this perfect connection with God and people and people and people. I can't have it. And so when God created Adam, he gave Adam and Eve freedom to do whatever they wanted. There was just one thing they couldn't do. Do you know what that was?
Eat the apple.
Don't eat that. Don't eat the fruit yet. Like tomato?
Yeah.
No, it's disgusting.
What the?
Chicken. And that.
The other one. The other one. Dude, I need some bacon. I need some bacon, some bread.
He said, don't eat the what? Fruit. They could do, that was good. They could do anything they wanted, but there was a certain tree that they could not eat fruit from. And Satan knew that if they ate fruit from this tree, unity was broken. And so Satan convinced Adam and Eve to get alone away from God, and he convinced them to eat the fruit. Got them away from God and convinced them to eat the fruit, And they realized what they had done and went into hiding. I just want to give a side note here. Maybe the reason you can't get out of your sin is because you can't get into the presence of God. Okay? If you're struggling with sin, get into the presence of God. That was Adam and Eve's problem. They had gotten out of the presence of God, and it led them into sin. And then God found that after they had done the one thing He told them not to do, at that moment, God knew unity was broken, destroyed. Everything that was perfect was now ruined. Imagine your God and your creation, the one that you love so much, the one that you invested into so much, and you gave them freedom to do whatever they wanted. And they did the one thing you told them not to do. I can imagine God's heart being, why did you have to mess this thing up? Everything was going the way that it should, and you ruined it. This is all your fault. Okay? But then what happened next is so critical. I believe it's one of the most overlooked parts in all of Scripture. After Adam and Eve fell into sin, realized they were naked, what did He do? He gave them clothes to wear. He gave them clothes to wear. We think that's so just a part of Scripture, but that's so unique because this is what He didn't do. God didn't destroy Adam and Eve when they messed up. God didn't forget about them. God didn't stop loving them. But what He did do is care enough to comfort them. He saw their mistake and had compassion on them, and He continued to love them. What does this mean for us? When we as people messed everything up with God, rather than forgetting about us, He loved us so much that even in that moment, the plan was in place to fix what was broken. The moment of the biggest mess up in human history, moments later, God said, He didn't say you messed up. He said, I got a plan to fix that. He had compassion. He said, I got a plan to fix it. This is important. That's how important unity with God is to God. He wants unity with you. That's how important it is to God, for you to be in unity with Him. That at that moment, the plan was in place. And over the next 2-3 weeks, we're going to look at exactly what that plan is, and it's going to be great. But just know this. The plan was in place. Now that we've flashed back, let's flash back forward to this scene. So the disciples are gathered around Jesus, and they had invested everything. It's Thursday night, and in less than 24 hours, the rescue plan was going to come to pass. I can imagine Jesus sitting there, recognizing what was about to happen, sitting there with Judas, who he knew was just going to betray Him for a couple of bucks. Sitting there with Peter, who in just hours was going to turn his back and deny Him. Sitting there with all these men, having compassion on them. I can picture Him almost choking on the words, saying, this is a good thing. I'm going away, and it's a good thing. You see, because everything that happened from the moment Adam and Eve sinned and the initial plan of redemption was in place had led up to this intimate moment with Jesus and His friends. The plan was in place. And next week, we're going to look at Friday. We're going to look at what happened to initiate the plan. But that's it for the series part. Now I want to do just a little bit of teaching. I only got like 2 pages left. We just want to do a little bit of teaching. Got 3 points. Allow me to get in your head for just a second. With all this that we talked about, knowing that the plan's in place. If you're like me, you can get so close to God and feel like things are going great. Feel like, and sometimes it's not even like things are going like amazing. It's just like, wow, I've been doing pretty all right. And it's a great feeling. And then one little bitty sin, everything comes crashing down. You feel guilty. You feel shameful. You feel like you're not worth it. You feel like you messed up and God doesn't love you anymore. Has anybody been there? I've been there. I've been there so many times. Just everything comes crashing down. But here's what I need you to understand. At the biggest moment, the biggest mess up in human history took place, we never see a single sign of God saying, you loser, you messed it up, and I can't stand you. But we do see a sign of God saying, there's a plan in place to fix what you broke. That is God's heart. What I'm trying to tell you is God is way too invested in your soul to allow a few mess-ups to ruin everything with him. God is way too invested in your life or allow your sin to be so much that you can't get back close to God. I'm not giving you an excuse to sin, but I'm saying we're human and we mess up. And a lot of times when we mess up, we say, you know what, God, I'm done. And God's like, no. God's pulling on our heart more and more because he's invested in his plan. The plan was already in place. He's invested in you. And the enemy will try to convince us that we aren't worth it. He'll try to convince us that we've done too much. That's a lie. God's invested in you, and when you sin, he's begging you to bring that sin and reconnect it to him. Point number 2. Unity, as we see, it's the very heart of God. Unity is extremely important, okay? It's so important that Satan himself actually didn't want to just break the unity between us and God, but he wanted to create unity between us and sin, okay? What I'm trying to get you to see is that if you're not in unity with Jesus, you are in unity with sin. There is no in between. There's only one time in the Bible where sin and Jesus coincide. Okay, we're going to talk about that next week. But sin and Jesus don't match. So if you're not in unity with Jesus, you are in unity with sin. And so for us, the plan was in place for unity to be restored. But for us to have restored unity with Jesus, our unity with sin has to be broken first. Okay? That's going to be very important as we go into these next few weeks. But point number 3, and the one I really want to spend time on, is as we can see, there's this unity is incredibly important to God. Imagine being Jesus and knowing for 30 years what you were going to have to go through. And spoiler alert, he dies and gets like nails driven into his hands and stuff. Imagine knowing for 33 years this is going to happen. And seeing people turn their back on you, seeing people mess up. I can imagine how we would be and be like, you didn't do that stupid thing, as everybody tells a lie that he passes by, as everybody cheats as he passes by, as everybody does all this stuff. He's like, if you didn't do that stupid thing, I wouldn't have to go through with this. That's not Jesus' heart. Instead, Jesus is like, that's why. That's why I'm doing this. This plan of unity is so important to God. And this investment that he had in this plan tells me that this dying on the cross and serving Jesus is so much more than just a good idea. Okay? It's not just a good idea. This is the most important thing in the world to Jesus. And my question is it important to you? Simple question. Is it important to you? A lot of people do all the things they should as necessary as Christians. They go deep in church. They invest in their relationship with God. They spend intentional time with Jesus and his word. And that is so great. Keep doing that. But my question is, why don't we see these individuals growing? And God revealed something to me about my life. Because what would happen is, I would pray and go deep in the morning, but then when I went out into the world, I would be scared and like not wanting to tell people about Jesus. And I'm like, God, why is that? He's like, because you leave me at your prayer spot. We need to take Jesus with us. Okay? We need to take Jesus with us where we go. Because Jesus can't just be a part of our life. He has to be our entire life. Last page here. See, when this faith becomes important to you, it affects the way you live. It changes who you are as a person. Your priorities change. Your heart becomes brand new. And my whole point, if we can get some music going, my whole point in this series, there should be, he's got it. My whole point in this series is to bring back the importance of this message. Because we've lost it. We hear the message of Jesus and we're like, man, that's great. He died for my sin. But do you realize you have a responsibility to worship God? Your faith, your walk with God, isn't about you. Our life and our worship should be pointing to who Jesus is. Okay? We've lost the importance of this message. And I feel like a lot of us, and I'm talking to myself too, because this is a challenge for me, we treat this message of Jesus like it's a cute story rather than a life-changing truth. But I need you to understand that this truth changes everything. Everything. Without this truth, you have no peace. Without this truth, you have no joy. Without this truth, nothing matters. Without this truth, you have no future. Without this truth, when you're going through those times of, I don't know what's going to happen, you have no certainty that you're going to be somebody, that you're going to be great. But with this truth, we have the promise that, you know what? All I have to do is surrender my life to Jesus, and everything I could ever want and more is mine. I'm not saying like you're going to be a billionaire or nothing like that. See, God knows the desires of your heart more than you do. He created you. And if we just surrender our life to Him, it's all ours. Everything that He wants for us is ours. It changes everything. Here's what I want to do. As we saw earlier, the devil himself tried to break the unity we have with God because he saw how dangerous it is. We can learn something from this, okay? As I was modeling this, as I was looking at how this went down, I learned something. I learned that before Satan tried to break this unity, everything was perfect in the way it should be. What that tells me is that when things are going the way that they should, when God is about to do something incredible that has never been seen before, that Satan's go-to move is to break the unity. We live in a divided nation with no unity. We have people going against people. The enemy's tried to take Christians out of the church with this silly virus. He is trying so hard to break unity with us and God and with us and people. You know why? Because he recognizes something big is about to take place. He recognizes that, oh my goodness, Christians are going to do things they've never done before. Christians are going to walk in faith they've never had before. I've got to do something about it. Here's the thing. We know how the story is. There's victory. Christ wins. Where we commit is whether or not we choose to be a part of it. Because we get to choose the side. The battle's decided. We get to choose the side. I believe God is going to do something big. We just have to choose to be a part of it. And so tonight, the main focus of all of this is the simple concept that the plan is in place. The plan was in place since the beginning of time. The plan was in place when you committed your first sin, when you had that heart distant from God. The plan was in place. The plan is in place for your life right now. I don't know what you're going through. Listen, this season of my life is the scariest moment of my entire life. I have been dreading this summer that we're in right now for about 5 or 6 years. Scariest moment of my life. But it's drawn me closer to God. See, it's funny how sometimes whenever we're forced to rely on God and we're forced to relinquish control, we give God more control. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you're facing. I don't know if you don't know what your future is. I don't know if you're dealing with things, but here's what I do know. The plan's in place. The plan's in place for your victory. The plan's in place for your life. The plan's in place to restore the unity with you and God and with you and me. So in the next few moments, all we're going to do is thank God that the plan is in place. Maybe you feel like you need to pray about something else. Maybe you feel like you need to, talk to somebody. If you want somebody to pray with you, one of the leaders, go up to one of the leaders and ask them to pray with you. Okay? But just thank God that a plan is in place for you. And don't worry about being filmed. We're turning off the camera right now,